Welcome, fight fans, to another edition of Rolling with the Punches. Today we have a very interesting day. We have a historian on board. He's going to talk to us about some Mexican history of boxing, but the great Jack Johnson's also involved in this story. Dave Contreras out in Fort Lauderdale. How are you doing?
Doing great, Jaime. We're waiting for a big storm to hit us this weekend. Actually, now it looks like it's going to be a major hurricane, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Supposed to hit us on Sunday, but well, we're ready and set. But without further ado, Dr. Andrade, thank you very much for being on the show. I'll tell you before I hand you over to the questions that we have for you, I just want to commend you. I've been doing some research on your personal life, on your bio, and when you were 28 years old, I mean, when you graduated from high school, you wanted to go to college, but instead you got a job working in construction. And when you were 28 years old, now you're working, it's a hot day probably in El Paso, Texas, and you're looking up at the sky saying, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, it's 106 degrees, and here I am shoveling cement. And that's when you decided to go back to school at the age of 28 years old. And from that moment on, you got your AA, you got your bachelor's, you got your master's, and now you have your doctorate's degree. And you're a perfect example and a great role model to the people, to the kids watching our show, that you're never too old to go back to school. And we're honored to have you here because your dissertation was on the history of Mexican boxing. And with that, we want to welcome you to our show, and we're honored to have you as a great role model and as a great historian.
Yes, we are.
Well, thank you. That was a very kind introduction. I'm honored to be here, and thank you very much.
Dr. Andrade, so getting to it, man, let's get to the history of it. You brought a lot of history. I love history. And the history that you and I spoke of and David in the past was really interesting, especially when you started talking about the legend of Jack Johnson and the ties that he had with Mexico. But not just Mexico. Two of the legends, two of our heroes of the Mexican Revolution, Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa. That connection was wild to me. And I think it's so important, man, that we don't lose that history. And I think a lot of fight fans, Mexican-American and African-American and whoever else, I don't think they understand that there was a connection and a love between the both cultures back then. And I just want you to touch on that and get your perspective of the whole story.
Sure. Well, the connection was really much more between Pancho Villa and Venustiano Carranza and Jack Johnson. I'm not sure how in touch he was with Zapata, but really the story of Jack Johnson is that in Mexico, at least, he's as I guess a refresher for everyone who doesn't know. Jack Johnson is the first black heavyweight boxing champion. He gets charged with the ban under the Mann Act, and he, rather than serving time in prison, he essentially flees from the United States. He got charged because he had three wives, which at that point, 1908, 1910, that's against the law.
That's against the law?
Yeah, at that point.
Okay. I'm just kidding.
So he takes off. He bounces around. He goes to Europe for a few years. He goes throughout Latin America. He ends up like in Buenos Aires for a while. Ends up in Cuba for a little bit. And then in 1914, Pancho Villa, at this point, the Mexican Revolution starts 1910. By 1914, it becomes like a civil war, right? It becomes they get rid of Porfirio Diaz, which was the kind of default dictator that they had for around 32 years, I want to say. So they oust him, and then it just becomes a civil war, right? All of a sudden, everybody's trying to control Mexico. Everybody has different thoughts of what they should do. And Pancho Villa controls northern Mexico, where I'm from, where my family's from, Juarez. That becomes his headquarters for a few years. And he's trying to raise funds. He's trying to raise funds because now he's fighting against his one-time ally, Venustiano Carranza. And so the one idea that he has to raise funds is to stage a fight in Juarez at the racetrack. There's some articles, sources that say he expects upwards of like 100,000 people to show up, right? Because whoever's not familiar with this, Juarez is right on the border across from El Paso, from Texas. So at that point, you know, even people from the United States who want to see boxing, especially Jack Johnson, who hasn't been seen in the United States for years by this point, they could just pretty much cross over and watch him fight. So that's the plan. They're going to bring Jack Johnson to fight, and he's going to fight Jess Willard. Jess Willard is one of these great white hypes that they call him, that was supposed to be the great white hype was supposed to be, the great white hope, excuse me. The great white hope was supposed to be the person who finally beat Jack Johnson and basically restore the championship to the white race. That's, you know, that's what the name comes from, Great White Hope. And he's this like 6'7" guy from Kansas, I believe. And so the problem is there's no way for Jack Johnson to arrive in Juarez. Obviously, he's a wanted man in the United States. So traditionally, the easiest way to get to Juarez is to come in from El Paso. There's no way he can do that. Carranza controls the coast, so there's no way to come in through the coast, which is the other way you could come in. So the fight falls apart. The fight between Jack Johnson and Jess Willard. Actually, Jess Willard, for I think he actually ends up in Juarez and El Paso, just waiting for Jack Johnson to arrive. He's training there. He's eating there. You know, he's basically just waiting him out.
So was basically Pancho Villa going to be the promoter of that fight?
Yeah. Pancho Villa is going to be the promoter, and there's a newspaper article from Carranza saying, as soon as if we catch him, we're going to turn. This is to Jack Johnson. If we catch Jack Johnson 1 foot, he steps into our territory, we're going to turn him over to the United States, where he's a wanted man. So the fight falls apart. It ends up going to Cuba in Havana, and that is where Jess Willard beats Jack Johnson. Right? There's a famous photo of Jess Willard standing over Jack Johnson, and that became such a huge event, right? Because that was the Great White Hope finally wins. That for years and years, that picture of Jess Willard standing over Jack Johnson, that becomes kind of like a standard decoration in all of these bars across the United States. So that's what happens with Jack Johnson. He ends up losing his title. He for a long time, or I think he might have gone to his grave just saying that he threw the fight, that he lost it on purpose. His argument or his side of the story was that, actually, he had several sides to his story, but one of them was that U.S. authorities told him that if he lost the fight, that they would essentially pardon him. That's what he says. I mean, I never found any record of that. I'm not sure if you would keep that type of record,
But Dr. Andrade, wasn't he Franco prior to the possible promotion of Pancho Villa? He was friends with Carranza, right? Before that?
No, he was friends afterwards. So this happens 1914, 1915. Eventually, 1919, Jack Johnson's still in exile. He's still bouncing around Latin America, wherever he's at. At this point, 1919, Carranza he controls Mexico, right? Pancho Villa just stops. He doesn't stop fighting, but he's not as important as he was before. He's not as dangerous, basically. Zapata has been assassinated, and Jack Johnson's invited into Mexico by Carranza himself, the man who kept him from coming into Mexico before. And he invites him, and he's like his guest in his autobiography, Jack Johnson's autobiography. He mentions that they would speak regularly. He sees him as a friend, and they would hang out in Mexico City. Excuse me. So he shows up as a guest of, essentially he's a guest of the state of Mexico, and he's there. He's training military officials in boxing. He's putting on boxing exhibitions across Mexico. He for a while he has a nightclub in Tijuana. He has a land company where he takes out advertisement in the United States newspapers, black newspapers, where he's basically telling people, or not people, he's basically telling black readers that they need to go to Mexico because they're you're not it's not a racist, it's not as racist, let's say that, as racist as the United States is. So yeah, he ends up in Mexico in 1919, hangs out there for about, I don't know, 8 months, and then because of the revolution, it's just the violence picks up again. Carranza gets assassinated, and around this time, 1920, Jack Johnson kind of figures that he's probably better off. He's better off leaving the country because, you know, all of a sudden, being a friend of the president that just got assassinated, you know, you're not the most popular person there. So he makes arrangements. He crosses from Tijuana into San Diego County, or he crosses the border at Tijuana, and they arrest him. He shows up. He shows his passport, and what was, I guess, the early version of the Border Patrol or whatever it was. They take pictures with him. There's a famous picture of him. There's probably about a dozen United States officials there just posing with him because nobody's seen Jack Johnson in about a decade, right? He hasn't been seen in the United States. And they take him back. They take him back to first they take him to Joliet, which is a jail in Chicago. Chicago was the last place where Jack Johnson lived in the United States. So they drive all the way from Tijuana to Chicago, and the only thing that Jack Johnson says is, just don't go through Texas. I just don't want to go through Texas, just because he was afraid of what they would do to him. Even though Jack Johnson's from Texas, he's from Galveston. So he ends up in prison. He ends up eventually serving his year and 1 day sentence in Leavenworth prison. And the first Thanksgiving that he's there, or I guess the only Thanksgiving that he's there, the warden sets up an exhibition fight, and they bring in two professional boxers. You know, they're kind of like middling professional boxers. I mean, you know, people are there to watch Jack Johnson fight. They're there to watch him win, and the prison just gets filled with obviously the prisoners, but all types of government officials show up to watch him fight.
So it's like the Johnny Cash of boxing then.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and there's another picture that I found in the archives. I found this picture in Notre Dame University, in the University of Notre Dame library. There's a picture of him while he's inside the prison boxing, and so that's the story of Jack Johnson in Mexico. I mean, for a while, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but for a while, Mexico's plan with Jack Johnson is to make him a movie star. Right, to make him this character, just kind of like, well, you know, these Mexican films, like El Santo has a whole bunch of films that he has like 50 films. So I'm assuming the plan was to be like Jack Johnson contra las momias, Jack Johnson, you know, maybe not like that, but you know, this whole series of movies starring Jack Johnson. You know, maybe that would have happened had he been there longer than 9 months, had Carranza not been assassinated. Who knows? But he spent. He spent a good 9 months in Mexico, and then because of Jack Johnson, maybe not because, but he definitely helped popularize boxing in Mexico. Mm-hmm. Right, all of a sudden, after Jack Johnson left, the Mexican press starts to pay attention to boxing. For a few years, a few years later, Jack Dempsey, who by the mid-1920s is the most famous boxer, perhaps even celebrity, or definitely athlete. He's in Mexico. He shows up in Juarez, and there's even talks of having him fight against Jack Johnson in an exhibition. That doesn't happen. But after that, you know, Mexicans, the Mexican media, and then up until now, boxing becomes an important part of Mexican culture.
Wow. So when would you say the true origins of professional boxing? Because if I understand it correctly, I think the amateurs started around 1918.
In Mexico?
Yeah, I heard something
Oh,
like that. It was at one of the ports. It was
yeah,
basically they put four chairs,
right.
they made the ring out of the four chairs and they went at it. But
Well,
it was pretty much a kind of an amateur version.
yeah.
And
Well,
then
if I'm remembering correctly, it's in like in the 1880s that the first sanctioned boxing fight happens in Mexico, and this is kind of a change from, well, maybe not a change, but boxing today is really a working class sport. I think it's always been a working class sport, but the reason it was, well, one of the positives of boxing, according to Mexican officials, and according to why they even sanctioned it the first time, was because it was a way for basically Mexicans to settle their disputes without killing each other, right? That if you have an issue with your neighbor, rather than killing them or stabbing them or whatever, you lace up the gloves and you go at it.
makes sense to me.
What about heavyweights? Did Mexico ever produce any contenders? Not the United States Mexican Americans. Mexico. Did they ever produce any heavyweight contenders?
There, there was I'm going to answer you like this. There was a famous, not a famous, there was a Mexican heavyweight boxer that was on the Olympic team. He was from Juarez, Alfredo Suani. And this is in the 1960s. And one of the things that I found out about him, and one of the things that he complained about, was that everybody his size was turned into a wrestler, right? If you were big, you were automatically thrown into the lucha libre.
Yeah.
So no, there really isn't any impactful, famous heavyweight Mexican until, I mean, there's probably like the 60s. There was a oh man, I'm forgetting his name, but there was a Mexican who actually fought for the title against Joe Frazier in Madison Square Garden.
I remember that. His name was, I think, what, Manuel Romero, something like that.
Manuel, I want to say Ramirez. They called him El Pulgarcito.
Yes, I remember that. I remember being like 8 years old or 9 years old and listening to that fight on the radio with my father. I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
there's been a couple here and there, but nothing to sustain
Yeah.
the division, right? A lot of these, if you were a big Mexican boxer,
Mhm.
you basically had to go to the United States to get proper sparring. I mean, who are you going to fight in Mexico if you're 6'2", 250 pounds?
Yeah.
You gotta leave.
Even at that, I mean, I can count them right now on my, on one hand. You had Alex the Destroyer Garcia, you had the Eddie the Animal back in the day. You have Chris Arreola, and now you have Andy. Very few. I mean, that's just not a very big division for us yet. But as you can see, Mexican Americans are starting to grow. We're starting to get taller. We're starting to get bigger,
Right.
and hopefully we can produce some more heavyweights in the future.
Yeah, plus, I mean, there's no. This is more of a theory that I have. I mean, I've never heard anything. There's no study on this or anything, but I figure if you're if you're big and you grow up in California or Texas, I mean, you're gonna play football at this point, right? It seems like that. It seems like you have a. You're gonna end up playing football somewhere for the most part. I mean, it's almost like Andy Reese. I mean, he would have been like a perfect nose tackle or something, right? But thankfully or luckily, he ended up boxing.
Yeah, you're right. Never thought about that.
So were you excited when Andy Reese beat Joshua?
Oh yeah,
I mean,
I was.
yeah.
So I think this was the common thing. I just didn't expect that he would win, right? And I had seen Reese fight. I mean, I saw him. He would often fight, as you guys know, probably in like these Unimas shows, right? In the middle of night on Fridays on these Spanish language television. So I knew who he was, and I watched it. And when he got knocked down in I think it was the third round, I just thought that was it. And then once he stood up and knocked him down, I mean, it was. I mean, I have a wife and a 2-year-old that's how old my daughter was, and I had to really be quiet because I really wanted to like celebrate.
You know, there's 3 times in my life that I remember literally jumping off my seat or else just literally jumping. And the first time ever, I think, was when Julio Cesar Chavez beat Pernell Pernicker in the last round. Remember that fight? I remember I was at my Tío Manuel's house, and all of a sudden, the last round,
Mildred
That
Taylor.
was Major Taylor.
yeah, Mildred Taylor, that's what it was, Mildred Taylor. And I remember I jumped up, my Theo had popcorn, he threw the popcorn, and I mean, everybody was high-fiving. That was one time. The second time, I'm a big Denver Bronco fan. I was actually working that game when they played. I was a police officer working the field when they played against the Packers. And it was the first time they won the Super Bowl. I'm out in the field. All of a sudden, they win the game. And that's another time. I was in uniform. I jumped up. And the third time I remember jumping up was with Andy Reese. I was by myself at the house. I'm watching the fight. And I've been following Andy Reese since he was a kid. I've been going to almost all of his fights. I've been following him. And when he knocked him out and when the fight was over, he didn't come back out. I jumped up once again. Those 3 times were the times that, man, being proud of being a Chicano, a Mexicano, and a world champion, beautiful.
Yeah, like I said, I was watching that fight in bed next to to everybody is sleeping. And and when Reese got up and knocked down Joshua, that's when I had to go to a living room because I knew I was going to be jumping at least. Even if I couldn't make noise, I was going to be jumping.
Jumping, exactly. What about you, Jaime? Did you jump?
Oh,
Did
man,
you watch it?
You just took me back to the Major Taylor fight. Yeah,
oh,
that was one of them.
What a
that was
fight.
definitely one of them. You touched a little bit on the Pernell Whitaker. That fight, I honestly said Pernell outpointed him that fight. I know I'm going to be slammed on that by the Mexican fight fans, but I think Pernell got him that fight. I think he outpointed him.
Yeah.
But there was some great fights. One of them that I remember clearly as a youngster too was when Azuma Nelson, when he fought Salvador Sanchez, man, they went at it.
Yes.
And that was a great fight. Salvador Sanchez also with Gomez, Roberto Gomez. Man, what a fight. But as of recently, I think that when Juan Manuel Marquez knocked out Pacquiao, that was another moment that I kind of jumped up in the air and wasn't expecting it.
No.
Because the momentum was going Pacquiao's way, and then all of a sudden, boom, gone. So
I don't think anybody was expecting that. I think that caught everybody surprised, right, Doctor?
Man, I watched that in El Paso. So this might happen in San Diego or Tijuana, but you're close enough to the border that you get the Juarez feed. So you just don't pay for the pay-per-view. And I watched it and I thought he killed him. I thought he was dead.
Yeah, me too.
And I would say, since we're talking about being so excited we jump, I would say the other one, I know he's not Mexican, although he's kind of an honorary Mexican since he was trained by Robert Garcia, was when Maidana took down Broner that first round, or the second round, or the first round he took him down, right?
Yeah.
I remember watching it. I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was a great fight. That Broner, he just got arrested. Did you guys hear about that? He just got arrested for, I think he had payments due with child neglect or whatever. Yeah, I just saw the clip that he just got arrested, got arraigned. Yeah.
Yeah, you never know. It's sad, that's why I think it's important for these youngsters to understand, you put in all this work, you become champion, you become a household name. You got to always remember, man, that you have eyes on you constantly. And, unfortunately, some people are looking for you to just slip, and some people are there to pick you up, but you always have eyes on you. And that's why I think it's important for all these fighters and all these athletes in general to be good role models, man. They were blessed with that talent, and they need to give back. And we've come across some good fighters, Dave and I interviewing in these last months, where every time when we finish, Dave calls me back, says, what a nice guy. What a great guy.
Yeah.
And it's so true. It's like, man, are we just lucking out? Or man, dude, there's some real gentlemen in this sport. And I'm just happy that they exist. But
Yeah,
but
I've
you,
had I mean, I've interviewed, I haven't interviewed that many people, but I've interviewed several people, and yeah, I mean, they've all been some of the nicest people I've interacted with. I mean,
Yeah.
I interviewed Errol Spence once, and I show up to his gym, and he wasn't there. There was some miscommunication over when I would show up. So I show up the next day, and he's just apologizing that there was like a mix-up, right? And I was like, man, I mean, you don't have to. I mean, this happens, right? But yeah, he was he was a very nice guy. The same with Mikey Garcia. One time I interviewed him, and these are all very smart, very nice guys, right?
You know what's one of the things that I find in common with the Latino or the Mexican American fighters and Mexican fighters is they're number one, are grateful. Second of all, they want to give back to the community. Right, Jaime? Almost everybody, not almost everybody that we've talked to, because that's one of our last questions. So what do you want to do? What's your overall goal in life? And every one of them says, I want to give back to the community. Anything that I can, I want to give back. And that's wonderful to see these young men that have made it to the top, and even at the top, at that level, like Mikey Garcia, wants to run for public office, wants to help the community, wants to give back. And I think it's beautiful, right, Jaime, to see that.
It's beautiful and refreshing, man, that
Yeah.
that we still got good people like that, and they don't need to do it, and it's from their heart.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful part about it, and that's why I love the sport, and that's why I think we just need to showcase these people, because they're so humble. They don't do it, for that, but it's good, man, to sometimes give a good pat on the back. They deserve it, and man, that's why we're here.
So, Doctor, you wrote your dissertation, right? On the history of Mexico, the boxers. In your opinion, who's the best ever Mexican boxer? Who's the best Mexican boxer ever, in your opinion?
I would say it's Chavez. It's Julio Cesar Chavez. Because he's just he's not only technically great, although there's always an argument for a few others.
Mhm.
But I think Chavez is great just because of what he means socially, what he symbolizes, right?
Yeah.
Chavez is just perfectly placed historically, where he begins fighting in Mexico, obviously, but once he comes over to the United States and starts fighting, by that point, Mexican immigration has skyrocketed here into the United States, and the people that were already here along the Southwest, other parts of the Midways, specifically places like Chicago and stuff, that's like the second, third generation already coming up and seeing Chavez, who you could argue for the first time ever was the world's best. There was a Mexican who was the world's best at something, right? At least at a wider level. And Chavez was that. Chavez was, there was a good 3-4 year run where he was pound for pound, arguably the top one, right? And specifically the way he fought, he symbolized machismo, huevos, whatever you want to call it, Mexican boxing, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I think Chavez is the most important, and not just the most important, but the best Mexican boxer. I mean,
I agree.
He's so important that even now he hasn't fought in. I mean, I know he just fought an exhibition, but his last real fight was 2005. Even now, all these boxers get compared to him, right? If unfortunately for Canelo, he's compared to Chavez, even though they're two completely different fighters. And it's almost like Michael Jordan, right? Like LeBron James has always been compared to Michael Jordan, and I think that's going to happen. It's going to happen pretty much for every boxer for the next, I don't know, at least 20 years.
Do you think that after Canelo retires, that people will look at him with the same type of admiration and respect that they have for Chavez?
No, I don't think so. What he means symbolically, no, but as a boxer, as just a pure boxer, I think Canelo's going to be one of those boxers that in my opinion, he's not fully appreciated until until he
Yeah.
stopped fighting. I think at this point, because of Chavez, because of him fighting Chavez Jr., because of his him starting with Televisa, because of what hope. I mean, the drug suspensions. You know, there's a handful of things that you could be critical of Canelo. But overall, man, I think Canelo's great. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about him is that he's gotten better. That he doesn't. If there was ever a boxer who would lose motivation, it'd be Canelo. And he's always in shape. He's always in the gym. Every time I see him fight, for the most part, he seems to be improving. So I think Canelo's great. Unfortunately, he's just not going to live up to the standard of Chavez. But I mean, there's no Mexican boxer that's going to be able to do that, at least into the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Best trilogy, best boxing trilogy that you ever saw, Hispanic with Mexican boxers.
Man, well, I have to go with Pacquiao and
Marquez.
And Marquez, yeah. I think part of that is just because he was arguably robbed a couple of times, right?
Yeah.
And just the way he won at the very end, not just that he beat him by knockout, but that he was losing. I mean, I know he knocked down Pacquiao, but Pacquiao he came back and he was kicking the shit out of him pretty much.
Yeah.
You know, his nose is all bloody, and just the way that fight ended. I'm talking about it, I'm getting like goosebumps. You know, when he's celebrating up in the corner and he's all bloody, and even after the fight, when he's giving these interviews, I mean, his face is tore up. So I would say that, I mean, I know they fought 4 times, but I would say that's probably the best one.
What about your Jaime? Best Mexican trilogy.
That one's up there with me, but I think what set it off for me is the trilogy between Michael Carbajal, Manitas de Piedra, and Chiquita Gonzalez. That was the beginning of the little guys opening up the doors for the real money fights. And man, they banged it out. It was back and forth and back and forth. You just didn't know who was going to knock out who, but it was a true Mexican warrior fight, a Mexican American, a Mexican national. They went at it, and I really enjoyed that trilogy.
Yeah, mine would be Barrera Morales. Oh my God! I mean, talking about 2 warriors just going at it. I mean, my God! I mean, all the fights are great, but I mean, just Barrera Morales. I remember watching all 3 of them, and what outstanding. Yeah. So, doctor, now you're writing full time, and is your goal to write full time for example, ESPN, for DAZN, for a boxing association? Is that one of your goals?
Yeah, my goal is definitely to write full time. It doesn't have to be specifically about boxing, but I mean, if I got a job writing about boxing, that'd be great. But I think what interests me more, I mean, obviously I write about Mexican boxing, but I'm essentially writing about Mexican boxing to examine something else about Mexican culture, right? Through boxing, I feel like you could tell a lot about Mexican culture pretty much by looking at how people fight, who they cheer for, how they react when their favorite boxer wins or loses. And yeah, that'd be great if I could write about boxing. I'd definitely take that opportunity.
In the next couple of weeks, we're going to have Fernando Beltran on our show. He's CEO or CFO of Sanford Boxing. And every time you see Julio Cesar Chavez fight, you always saw Fernando as a little boy. I don't know if you go back in time, he was that little boy that was always, not the little boy, the young boy that was young man, that was with Julio Cesar Chavez as Chavez was coming up. And now he's a grown man. Now he's a CFO or CEO of Sanford Boxing. And I'm sure that we're going to introduce him to you, doctor, because he needs to read, God willing, when you write your book, because he's in Mexico. And Sanford Boxing today has, I think, the majority of champions in Mexico, right, Jaime? I mean,
Yes.
they have Neri, they have Mukia. I mean, the list goes on of who they currently have and who they've had in the past. Actually, he had, I'm not sure if he had Barrera, but I know for a fact that he had Morales.
Yeah, I think he
So
had Morales. He had more of the fighters from the Frontera.
from the Frontera, yes.
Mhm.
So that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about, the history of Mexico. Because I'm sure, I mean, he was born and raised in Mexico, speaks fluent English, and we're going to definitely talk to him about you. Tell him,
Sure,
you
sure.
know, the great things that you've done, your dissertation, and what some of your goals are. Hopefully, we could put you guys together, and hopefully, a good relationship, a good working relationship, can be established because they need a good liaison like you here in the United States.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Jaime, anything else?
No, man, I really appreciate the
Yeah.
doctor coming aboard and giving us that history piece, sharing his knowledge with all of us. And I'm excited for the next chapter, man, of boxing, of Mexican boxing, Mexican-American boxing, Mexican boxing in general. I'm glad that we had some pretty nice explosive fights here these last, actually this last month. And there's some good boxing coming up here before we close out the year. I'm hoping next year, man, is going to be explosive because you got a lot of hungry fighters ready to fight, and we're ready to watch them. So with that said, man, I thank you for coming on again today, and I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart.
No, thank you guys for having me on at any time.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. And when is your book coming out so we could start publicizing it on our show?
Hopefully sometime in 2022. I have to actually turn in a manuscript here in the 16th of November. So hopefully in the next 18 months or 2 years.
Do you have a title for it?
No, I have a working title called Fighting for Lo Mexicano, right? But I mean that's just kind of like a stand-in for now.
You know, rolling with the punches sounds pretty good. Rodando con los chingazos.
Yeah.
Hey, muchas gracias. Thank you, Doctor, very much, and God bless you, huh?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Salud.